the spiritual Genesis. This is a chapter of the Genesis book from Kardec. Um, so this is a sequence of like public speeches that we did on Genesis, and I think today is the last one. The book has many other chapters. We chose the ones that we thought it could be like a better chapters to be able to do like a public speech, because the Genesis is a very complex book that requires it when you read it. It will be more suitable for like a study, but we try to find some of those chapters that um, could be good for our public speeches here. Um, so what does this chapter cover? So it covers the idea of the spiritual principle, and as well as the vital principle, the differences between the spiritual principle and the vital principle. It also talks about like the union of the spiritual principle with matter. So how does that happen, and when does that happen? Um, also comments on the hypothesis upon the origin of the human bodies. So it's interesting because, and I'm going to touch that. Kardec was very careful. So he uses the word hypothesis because at the time, like this book was released in 1862, and Darwin's book was released in 1858. So it's very likely that by that time, uh, Kardec wasn't still aware of what was going on in terms of like the evolution theory. But we're gonna touch that. So that's why he was very careful. He uses the word hypothesis, right? Um, so we're also gonna talk about like incarnation and reincarnation. How does that process work? And also, the last topic here would be the emigration and immigration of spirits between different worlds. Right, so it was a pretty long chapter. I'm gonna try to cover some of it. I hope I can spark some inspiration on you guys for you guys to read the book. So just remembering the Genesis was the last book that was written by Kardec. So it's part of like the five books that are the base for Spiritism by itself. Um, so, all right. So let's start here with the spiritual and vital principles. So before we start that, there is on the introduction of the Spirits book, Kardec defines us following like those three things. So he says like there are in man three things. So the first thing is the body or material being, which is analogous to the animals, to the plants. So animals, plants, everybody has a material body, right? So that's our material body. That's like that's what we see now, as we are all incarnated at this moment, right? So the second thing is the soul, or the immaterial being, which is the spirit incarnated into the body. So like the term soul really means spirit when is incarnated to the body. So so that's why we use like Kardec makes this differentiation between soul and spirit, because we are always the spirits. We can be incarnated, and when we are incarnated, like he uses the term soul to essentially relate our spirit while incarnated, right? And the third thing that a lot of people don't realize, we also have this link that connects the spirit, which is completely non-material, to our body, which is the material part that we call like pure spirit. So the pure spirit is partially material, so it's still made out of like material fluids, and it essentially interconnects like our spirit body and our real body, or our when I say real, like I mean like the material body. All right. So that being said, let's talk a little bit about like the spiritual principle. So I have a question for you guys. So the question that, and this is not my question, it's Kardec's question. So he uses that a lot. Does the spiritual principle have its source in the universe cosmic element? Can it be a transformation of it? A mode of existence of this element like light, heat, electricity? You guys think like the spiritual principle has like same kind of characteristics that we had in light, electricity, heat? You guys think like that would be the case here?
Those lower forms are a reflection of
Yeah.
Manifestation.
So we have this thing that we call like the cosmic fluid, which creates pretty much everything. But in this particular case, our spiritual principle is not made of that. It's not part of like, it's not made of electricity or light or heat. It's a completely separate thing. So it is a spiritual matter, right? It's completely separated from. It's no material at all. So that's why we have the pure spirit to essentially like combine our known material essence, which is the spiritual principle, with the material things, right? So that being said, admitting there is a spiritual being and its source found to be outside of matter, what is it? What is it? Its origin? Where does it come from, right?
So did you answer the first question?
Yeah. So yeah. The answer is.
It comes from the cosmic element, or not?
Yeah. It doesn't come from a cosmic element per se. It's not a material thing. It's not a material thing. It's a completely separate element per se, right? It's not really like a physical or material spirit. Your spirit is completely immaterial. That's the answer to that question.
Okay. And the cosmic element is material.
It's in this case we're talking about like material things, not necessarily like no material things. So the spirit is completely no material. So that's what Kardec wants us to know here. So again, admitting there is a spirit being, where is its source? Where does it start? And the answer to this question here, it's something that I guess like we're still trying to answer ourselves, right? So where does it come from? So Kardec tried to guide us here, and hopefully by the end we're gonna understand a little better, like what is its source. But he brings a lot of like evidences and a lot of facts about how like we were generated, and how do we understand about like what is our understanding on how we were created and how long we have been here. And so we're gonna hopefully cover and be able to partially answer this question at the end.
Are you going to talk about the intelligent principle at some point, or what's the difference? If you're not, in your point of view, what's the difference between spiritual principle and intelligent principle?
Yeah, that's. I'm gonna comment on my own view. I believe the intelligent principle is the same thing as the spiritual principle. So we have the vital principle, which is. So we have the spiritual principle and the vital principle. So we, unfortunately, like when I read the Spiritist, it has like a lot of different nomenclatures that mean the same thing. But in this case, like I just want to make the differentiation here, which is what is the difference between the vital principle and the spiritual principle, which is your intelligence, it is your mind, or it is your consciousness. Like here in the U.S., it's very common to use the word consciousness as your spirit. So it is your intelligent being, right? Which is completely separated from matter. So the first thing Kardec points out is, when does the union of the spiritual principle with matter happens, right? So in order to understand that, he talks about like what is the body. So what he says is that the body is the envelope, or the inventory, as we say in Portuguese, is the envelope and the instrument for the spirit. So the spirit doesn't have, since the spirit doesn't have like material properties, so it needs something to basically control. Like so essentially, our spirit is the little hand that is controlling the how's it called, like or like if when you're controlling the puppet, or like the driver driving a car. So we are really controlling. I wanted to use like the excavator. So when you have like this excavator, which is like a huge machine, there's somebody controlling it. That's our spirit. So our spirit is using our pure spirit and then controlling everything that we do in our body, right? So, and one thing to make a comment is when we are connecting to our body. So through the process of incarnation, and we're gonna cover that a little bit later, but there's a moment where when this connection happens, we lose the sense of consciousness for a little bit of time, and And this is on purpose because we need to do that to be able to, when we start this new incarnation, we kind of give a reset button in our memory, right? So we purposely, and I think like God, when he was architecting the system, he thought that would be a good mechanism for us to release ourselves from like those bad things that we have done and things that we're not proud of. So when we are carrying that to another life, we're essentially like getting this reset just so we don't suffer from it. And in the same way, it essentially, like he says here, um, as soon as we start regaining our consciousness, some of the abilities that we used to have in the past, they start to arise, right? So when we think about like, especially when you see some little kids playing piano, they never had like any classes of piano, and they start like playing beautifully. How do you explain that? Like how can we really explain the fact that a little kid with like 3, 4 years old, or sometimes a little more, can play like Mozart or Beethoven or something like really complex, right? It has to come like from like a different life. So this is one of the things that he mentioned here, and the other thing he comment, and he makes a comment about when we're thinking about like the spiritual principle versus the vital principle. If we consider only matter and we abstract the spirit, man has nothing that distinguishes him from the animal. So we would be still like very brute and very like how can I say, very rudimentary, right? So if we in some cases where there are people that live a condition on their lives, like if for instance if somebody suffer some sort of like brain damage, and sometimes the body is still kind of functioning, but it's only living kind of like this organic life. It doesn't have like a spiritual life still attached to it. So it's possible for us to live like this, what he calls like the animal life. And he also mentions during this chapter that sometimes at night we disconnect ourselves from our body. Our spirit disconnects ourselves from the body, and we sometimes we go to the superior plans to essentially help or to work, and then our body's just organically sitting like on your bed, and there's no spirit at that moment. I mean, you're still connected to it. Yeah, there is still connected to it, but you're not physically there. So he comments on that. So again, let's come back here to the hypothesis upon the origin of the human bodies. So again, the Spirit's book was published in the same year as Charles Darwin published his very famous book, The Origin of the Species, which, does anybody know or don't know what the origin of the species was about? So I'm going to give you like a quick brief, and my wife, you guys can talk to her many times. She has a lot of experience with that. So essentially, that was the book that Darwin published, and also there's not only Darwin, there's also like this other guy here. So the guy on the left is Darwin, and the guy on the right is his name was Wallace, A.R. Wallace, and we were just talking about that yesterday. And so Darwin, I think he went to Colombia or like some place in South America and many other places, and he realized that we all have evolved from like a similar ancestor. All the species in the world have evolved from like this very, and I think was it an algae or like yeah, more like a bacteria. So we all, our major ancestor billions and billions of years ago was a bacteria, and then we start according to Darwin.
Right.
Yeah. So according to Darwin, and Wallace had a similar theory, but for some reason, and at the same time, they kind of like Darwin published first, and then Wallace became the co-author. Oh, it wasn't it first?
No, so Darwin actually had the theory ready for 20 years, but he didn't want to publish because his wife was very Catholic, and she said that he was going to hell because he was going against what God was saying. And so he just kept the book and all his ideas to himself for 20 years. He just like his colleagues now. And then he wasn't publishing it. He was waiting for her to die or something to happen. And then Wallace wrote to him saying, I came up with this theory, and I know you're studying evolution. I want your input in it. And then he went there and published it.
Yeah, so that all happened kind of like at that time, 1858, which was when like Kardec was publishing for the first time the Spirits book. So it was an idea that wasn't like grown as it is right now. So the theory of evolution, right? And also the idea, because I believe human beings always thought about like, okay, are we really related to monkeys or to the apes somehow? Like, what is this relationship? But up to that point, like there were no like scientific proof that there really were some relation, right? But then I actually found here, it's down here, and I can send that to you guys later. I found this article talking about Wallace specifically, not necessarily about like Darwin, but the article was saying that so Wallace had the exact same concepts, right? And he was the co-author of the evolution theory, but one of the things that differentiated him from Darwin was the fact that so Darwin said that it was randomly that things or that the environment would force certain species to survive and some other species to die, right? It was a combination of like, it was kind of like a random like scenario that would cause those those animals to branch out from like their ancestor. So like when we branch out from like our common ancestor to the monkeys, right? There's something that randomly happened that turned us to become like humans, and the ape like the monkeys, right? So, but that was Darwin. But Wallace had like a different idea. So he was a spiritualist at the time. He already was studying spiritualism for 10 years. So his idea was that there's something controlling the environment and forcing to those things to happen, right? To branch out. So that was like the main difference between the ideas between Darwin and Wallace at the time. And so he even and there's like apparently like he did a speech and made this article back in 1864, which was in a very similar year that I think the Genesis was published in 62. So he made this. He made this. If you guys read the article, it will be. It's very enlightening, right? So but the point I want to make here is that Wallace had a similar idea to what Kardec believed. So now I'm going to come back to the Genesis here. So Kardec had very similar. He shared very similar ideas to Wallace and Darwin, and we're talking about a guy that never heard about the evolution theory at that point, right? So he makes this comment here. I'm not sure, William. Can you read that to us, please? Like just this paragraph right here.
Which one? The bottom paragraph?
Yeah.
By admitting this hypothesis, one can say that under the influence of and by the effect of the intellectual activity of its new inhabitant, the envelope has been modified, embellished in details, yet preserving the general form as a whole. The improved bodies, by procreating themselves, have reproduced themselves in improved conditions, like grafted trees. They have given birth to a new species, which has been gradually removed from the primitive type, according as the spirit has progressed. The spirit of the monkey, which has not been annihilated, has continued to bring about bodies of monkeys for its use, like wild fruit reproduced from wild fruit. And the human spirit has produced bodies of men, varying from the first established form. The trunk has become divided, forked. It has produced a sprout, and this sprout has become an independent trunk.
So again, like when I read that, I kind of had like some chills because this is exactly what Darwin and Wallace says. So we branch out, like we had the same ancestor with the monkeys, right? At one point, which like that ancestor wasn't a monkey itself. It was like a major ancestor, and then we branch out. So we have the monkeys today, and then we have the human beings on the other side of the. And actually, it wasn't the. We didn't have like the human beings right away. Like if you guys study like anthropology, there's like many variations until like we got to the point that we are, and we are still like morphing, right? Like we're still like. Eventually, like in 1,000 or I would say like I wouldn't say 1,000, but maybe in 1,000,000 years, if you're still around, we're not gonna have like the exact same form that we have today, because the environment is still gonna change and we're still like evolving in that sense, right? So and that's exactly what the Spirit said here. So we branch out purposely, but what the evolution theory doesn't say is that the randomness is it like really random? Like what is behind this randomness, right? This is where I believe like God put his hands on. So he essentially manipulated the environment in a way that we could become what we are today.
That's essentially the difference between the two theories, right?
Yeah, exactly. And
one
unfortunately,
is randomness, and the other one is there is a root cause behind that.
exactly. So and even later, and if you read that article that I mentioned about Wallace, the fact that he was a spiritualist made him like I would say, like people question his ability to deliver like the theory of evolution because he was a spiritualist. So like unfortunately, and it's still today like the scientific world, and we had the presentation last week from Nadi talking about that. We have like for some reason like scientists still don't believe in God, but this randomness doesn't sound right. And I remember like when what's his name, Einstein published like the theory of relativity. The theory of relativity also says that there's a random fact that nobody knows that connects two elements, right? But Einstein always says, I don't believe in randomness. Like, I know for now it's random because I don't understand why, but he never really believed in randomness. He said, there's got to be something controlling this randomness, right? Which, exactly, manipulating. All right, so that gives us a little bit of foundation in how was the human body formed, and also, so we talk about more like about the bodies itself. So we're gonna start talking a little bit more about the spirit, right? So before we start talking about incarnation, I want to bring this slide, and this is a slide that from a presentation that I did a couple of months ago. So talking about incarnation, so is reincarnation a spiritism thing? Do you guys believe that only us, the spiritists, believe in incarnation? No, it's something really old, and it comes back to the Greeks. Even those before Socrates and Plato, they believed the soul survived death. So even Pythagoras, which is one of the most famous mathematicians, and whom like his equations we still use today, he believed that the soul was immortal and was subject to cycles of rebirth. Right? So we're talking about like thousands and thousands of years ago. So the other thing I want to mention is that this comes back to even I didn't bring the slides today, but the first religion to be known to believe in one single God was called Zoroastrianism. And Zoroaster, which was the founder of that religion, he believed in reincarnation. So again, coming back to the history and why. So the Genesis is all about like how things started, right? So that's why I'm bringing all those references. So how does this whole thing started? All right. So I just want to make that point. Now we're gonna talk about like incarnation. So again, let's remember we have our spirit, which is our spiritual principle, or like our mind or consciousness. Then we have our pure spirit, which is like this semi-material body that survives death, right? And then we have our body itself. So there's a book from André Luiz from Francisco Xavier, like this, which is a Brazilian medium, very famous, and I believe most of you guys know, called The Messengers. And there's a passage there that he describes in detail the moment of death of a patient. So André Luiz is in a hospital with another higher level spirit, and this higher level spirit puts his hand over Andre's front here, and then he starts seeing the body the moment before the body disconnects from like the perispirit, and he talks about like in very deep details like how the molecules are disconnecting each other like from the perispirit to the body. So the same thing happens when we incarnate. So there's a process where our perispirit kind of creates a bond with our molecules in our body, and when we're forming the body, right? So there's a moment when we are incarnating, when we are born, that this connection happens. So it doesn't describe like in with a lot of detail, but essentially like our spirit it always survives, but the body is material, so it gets rotten, and it's eventually our body dies, right? So when we're getting born, there's this connection that happens between our pure spirit with our body, and also with our spirit. So our spirit is connected to the spirit, and then the pure spirit to the body. So again, on that very moment of birth, the spirit loses the consciousness, and as we start growing and we start recovering some of like those properties and aptitudes that we had, essentially we start that they were in this latent state. We resume their activity and we start like making it better. So a lot of people they have some skills that they don't know why they're good at math, or some people have like more like kind of like social skills and they don't understand why. Maybe because we have worked on that in our past lives. Like in my case, for instance, I really like languages, and it's relatively easy for me to learn languages. So I believe there's gotta be something that I have done in the past. I don't know, but each one of us have some sort of like natural ability that eventually came from like past lives, and we are always learning. We are always improving upon like these skills that we have, especially those skills that we can carry on, right? So again, during sleep, our body partially disengages itself, and then we sometimes like at night we're people have dreams of like, oh yeah, I dream about my grandma that eventually passed away or something like that. So we have those encounters that not necessarily happen where our body is. So we essentially get out of our body. And again, this is not something that happens every day, but every one of us experience that, right? They say like that very evolved people, which in most of the cases are here to help us to evolve, like at night they will go to other spheres to help other spirits while they're sleeping, right? So
But can you comment about the second phrase, in the very moment of the birth?
yeah, that's exactly what I mentioned before. We lose all our consciousness in that moment of birth. We lose our memories. We lose and the reason why is that we don't want to suffer in this new existence of like the bad things we have done in the past. So we don't want to carry that into this new life. So that's why we lose the consciousness for a second, and when we recover it, we recover it partially because we don't know what we have done, or we don't know who we are, who we were like in our past lives, and that's on purpose.
But,
Right?
Are we still responsible for all the things that we did?
Absolutely.
We just lose the memories.
Exactly.
We're still responsible for all the things that we did in the past.
Exactly. It's just like a way for us to. Let me try to think about an example here.
But Claude, my question is very simple. What's the definition of birth?
You
Like-
come out from your mother's womb.
Yeah.
Exactly, like the material birth,
Yeah, the material birth. The moment you're born.
Physical birth.
the physical birth.
I understand what the physical birth is.
Yeah. That's
But
the moment.
what I'm trying to
The
understand
first
is,
breath. The first breath. Some people say.
what's the the very tiny line between from 1 second to the other that makes this connection.
Some say it's the first breath. Is when the soul enters the
Yeah.
body for permanent.
So in reality, so there's another book, and I think it is Nosso, or I don't remember which book was exactly, but it talks about like this person that it's preparing itself for incarnation. So during pregnancy, like the spirit in the spiritual world starts already to lose gradually. Like it's not something that happens like
But that's the prep work.
yeah, it's a prep work. So you're like eventually during pregnancy, like the spirit is not completely connected to the little body on the mom's womb yet, right? So it starts to eventually lose like this consciousness, like a bit every day, until the moment that the birth happens, where it completely erases like all those memories, and and you become like a little baby, so you don't have like the abilities that you had as an adult, right? That's a physical part of it. So the physical part also reflects on the spirit. So the spirit doesn't have the same kind of like power or mind power as a baby that you used to have when you was already an adult, or as a disincarnated spirit, right?
So in other words, we can choose exactly the moment when we lose our consciousness.
No, it's not about like it's just the process.
No, it's
Like-
not a process because you can have a C-section today, tomorrow. I can choose the day, I can choose the minute.
Yeah, that's the physical. That's the physical.
But but again, we're talking about a bird, right? What's the definition of bird? That's why I'm trying to understand, to define that timeline when you lose. But it's not for this speech, but I'm just trying to understand exactly what's the definition of that's very
Yeah, it's-
specific moment.
It's the moment. It doesn't. It's not about like time. It's when the birth happens, right? If the birth, like for some reason, some kids like they have they're born premature, right? So the parents are not expecting the kid, like the little baby, to be born with 6 months or 7 months or whatever, but that happens. So in that very moment that the birth happens, when you're removing the kid from like the mom's womb, that's when the birth happens, and that's when the connection with like the final connection between the spirit and the body really happens. And they say like it takes about like 7 years to create that complete bond between the body and the spirit. And again, it's something that we read, and it might vary like from one case to another. We can only comment on things that we read and that we know. But in that moment that the kid is really arising to the world, that's the moment that that the spirit will lose completely its consciousness, right? So, yeah, and there's also another thing I want to mention here. So, in this other book from Francisco Xavier, Nosso, there's a moment that they mention that I think like 2 days before she incarnates from like the spiritual world, her husband was already incarnated, but he was still like a little kid. But then again at night he recovers, like when he's outside of the body he still had like some of the consciousness that he had as a spirit. So while we are incarnated, we don't have like the access to those memories, but as a spirit, when we go back to the spiritual world, we still have access to some of our consciousness, right? And they describe this moment where it's a couple of days before she incarnates again. So they describe this glass dome that like opens up in in a room, and she starts talking with her husband, which is already like a little kid, but being outside of the body, the kid is sleeping at that point, and he starts saying, "Oh, come, I'm waiting for you." So because they're gonna do a journey together here on Earth as well. So they describe that moment, and that was a couple of days before she incarnates back to a body. So I would recommend you guys to read that, because it kind of like explains in a lot of detail, and I think like a lot of the Andrea Luiz books are are about help us to understand those processes a little better, because he brings so much detail that is very impressive.
No, in the same book, Sandra is mentioning about abortion. I remember the spirit that may or may not be in that already feeling all the, the destruction and all the terror that it is. So that is the question I think he was having, if the spirit's already in.
It's so the what they describe is that the process for you to incarnate, it's not, I wouldn't say traumatic, but it's a very intense process, right? And you having all your consciousness as a spirit in the spiritual world, you start losing this consciousness, and that's kind of like a little bit painful, right? So an abortion in a lot of ways, and I mean, I'm not saying this happens for every single abortion, or there are some cases where some kids would born and then like they'll pass away a couple of weeks after they were born. So they say in a lot of those cases, like those were spirits that were supposed to live a little longer than, like in their past life, they were supposed to live a little longer than what they eventually did, and they have to go through like this, I would say, painful process of like incarnating again, and then suffering either an abortion or like living just a couple of days before returning back to essentially learn with that process, right? And that also helps like the parents to, because it's a really painful exercise for the parents, and through that they're essentially covering for some damage that they did on the past as well, right? So again, it's not 100% of the cases, but in a lot of cases that could be true. So I'm going to mention now about the Spiritist cycle. So I created this little chart here. So when we were born, like as a spirit, I'm not talking about like birth, the body birth. Like when we were first created as a spirit, the spirit is created simple and ignorant. So many thousands of incarnations ago, or I don't know, it's hard to describe. We were created simple and ignorant. What we believe is that if we were here, we have been doing this for like thousands of like cycles, right? So then what happens is like we go through like multiple incarnations and disincarnations, and then eventually like we as we incarnate and reincarnate, we start losing a little bit of like some of the material qualities, up to a point that like our morals are stronger than our material side, and that's the moment that we eventually jump into like a new spheres or new worlds, right? And then after some more cycles, we achieve a level of high or supreme felicity or supreme like happiness, and at that point, and some other religions, when they explain, oh yeah, we achieved we're going we're living in this paradise, and it's all about like relaxing and having like this easy life. It's like it's not what we believe. So they say when we get to that kind of level, and we are all migrating to that path, right? We are admitted into the councils of the Almighty, and then we become His messengers and His ministers for government of worlds and galaxies. So we will become, eventually all of us will become a high spirit, and that might take, especially for me, it's going to take a long time. Hopefully not, but we all going to get to a point that we are helping other spirits to evolve. So that's the path that we typically take. So it will take thousands of cycles of incarnation, and the thing is, like as we evolve, the world around us evolves too. So there's also the side that, and there are several books talking about it. We have what's the name of like Emmanuel book? The one that talks about like the evolution of the worlds. It just blanked from my mind. Yeah, like the In the Way of Light. So the word that book, it's called like In a Way of Light. There is a translation to English, and it talks about like how the spirits from like this other more evolved sphere came to Earth. And actually, it's interesting because in this particular chapter, which I'm not going to cover in detail here, talks about that too. It talks about the Adamic race. So the Adamic race and the idea that Adam was the first human being that some of the other religions talk about. This is the idea that this Adamic race was essentially like this race of humans that used to live in a different place, and then they were expelled from this other place and brought to Earth to help Earth. So those are, and what they say is that at that point they were in a similar stage of evolution that we are today, and they were brought to the Earth to become and to work with the savages that we had here at the time, right? And then that's what they call like the Adamic race, and he covers in a little details. So the Torah and like all the Christian religions, they use that term as well as so the major difference between Spiritism and those other religions is that this Adamic race, or like the fact that Adam came to Earth, really it's more like it's a figurative way, or like how can you say that? It's it's a metaphor. It's a symbolic way to describe how those more evolved spirits came to Earth and to populate Earth. And they say like we're also going through a process right now where the globe that we are, the Earth, is also going through like this process of like evolution, and eventually like those ones that doesn't fit here anymore, they're gonna be expelled to like another world, and eventually to become like the Adamic race to this new world, right? So everybody that want to be here and want to evolve with the Earth, we have to evolve ourselves.
It doesn't mean that it came from Adam, because if the human race started from just one, I mean, it doesn't make any sense, right?
Exactly. No, and so that's a very good point. So during that chapter, he mentions about like even on the Bible, there's a point where so he has like two sons, right? He has Cain and Abel, and at one point one kills the other, and then he one of the sons meet like another
goes to someplace else
and
marry somebody
out,
right?
like so how that be like feasible, right? So
Yeah.
he comments about that,
It makes no sense.
and then the other thing too, like he mentions that some other religions, they say the human beings are only around for 6,000 years, but we know, and the science shows us that this is not true. Where there are traces of human beings that go back to like they used to say 60,000 years, and then I was just reading recently that they found some evidence from 100,000 years ago. So we as human beings were probably around for at least like 60,000 years or more. So so that's where we are today. Do you guys have any questions here? So the other thing too, matter is a necessity, and it forces us to evolve. So the reason why, and because a lot of people would say like, okay, so if the goal is really to evolve, right, and taking process like in this, why do we have to come here to the Earth? Why can God make us like a high level spirit? But that wouldn't be fair, right? So he wants us to go through like matter because it makes us to overcome like issues. It makes us stronger by overcoming like those necessities that we have here on Earth, and that's why like incarnation is a necessity, because like intelligence comes with like necessity, right? If it wasn't for, so like we had some cases where meat men used to eat meat, But if we don't preserve the meat, if we don't create process to preserve that meat, like it's gonna get rotten. So it forces us to develop like processes to conserve the meat. Eventually, to the point that we created fridges, and who knows? Like we're
Salt, right?
salt. Yeah, we used to use techniques. So it like the necessity forces us to evolve, and that not only applies to the material needs, but it also forces us to learn and to think about like new ways to do things, and that's why we have to go through this process. So the other point that he touches here is about like the interval between incarnations. So when we are in this in between incarnations, like we go, and the Nosso describes that very well, like the book Nosso and some of the other books from Andrea Luiz as well. He mentions that while we are in this in between, we are still evolving as a spirit, because we are learning from like everything that happened on the very past life that we had, and plus all the other lives that we lived, and then we are creating a new plan for our next incarnation. There's also like schools and things that people attend while like they're in this in Solar and other more evolved spheres, right? Yeah. So
The last, did you talk about the last talk?
yeah, no, I think so. Yeah, I already mentioned about that. Why some spirits have such a short existence. So
You said when the baby born.
yeah, eventually, like yeah, when people suffer from like abortions or other things. So that's why we already covered that. So I'm gonna pass, and we're almost running out of time here. So that's a question that we want to ask ourselves. So if we didn't have like reincarnation, then how do we describe the difference? So let's say if every single soul or spirit was created in the moment that we were born, how come like they would be they wouldn't be like savages, right? Like if you were like this very simple and ignorant spirit, like, and if you were born today, how come like you wouldn't become like really like rudimentary in a savage, right? So and then Kardec answers that. So if souls have been created at the same time as bodies, those which are born today are as neo, all as primitive as those who lived thousands of years ago. So that's an explanation here. So in order for us to be, of course, like the society forces us to, and some may argue that we live in a society already that is evolved, so we would adapt to that society, but that's not always the case. And even here on Earth, like not everybody lives in the same kind of level of like evolution. So we have some places where there's a lot more suffering than others, right? So we have some places that are more evolved from a moral perspective than others, but we as a whole, like when we look at the Earth as a whole, we are kind of like on average we're kind of like in the same kind of like stage of progress. But there are nations or not necessarily nations or people, but there are places where people are more evolved in certain senses, but they're less evolved in other senses. So we're but there's still like a lot of places where there's much more suffering, right? And also when you think about the incarnation, that's something that when I started with Spiritism really struck me, was that if we don't believe in reincarnation, like essentially we couldn't believe that God is fair, right? So if you think about like one existence by itself, like we're here in the U.S., right? We have a lot of resources. It's fairly easy for us to find a job. We have like an abundance of food, but there are other places like Syria. Like I'll give an example right now, Syria, some places in Africa, or like even like in Asia, there are some terrible conditions. So like if you consider that reincarnation, it's not in case, then you have to consider God is not fair, because why we have so much here and people have so little, like even like I would say like in Brazil, if you go to the northeast of Brazil, in some areas people don't have like water, right? So when we think about that, yeah, that was like one of the main things that kind of brought me to Spiritism, because when I start thinking about that, it made a lot of sense, right? Um, and the other thing that's why I put the picture here. This is a picture from NASA, from like I don't know if this is the Milky Way by itself, but you can see like every little like shiny point is like is a star, and with the star there's like thousands of planets. So one of the questions that the chapter covers too is that, do spirits change worlds every incarnation? We kind of covered that already, but the answer is the spirit really will stay in a certain planet for many, many incarnations, until to the point that like her moral evolvement or moral evolution got to a point that surpasses like the capacity of that planet. That's when we make the jump, right? Or the other way we also make the jump is where, let's say if the Earth is evolving into like into a sphere of like more peace and what's the name that we use? Sometimes I forget. Yeah, the like we're going from like a planet of expiation and suffering to a planet of like regeneration. So if we don't follow that evolution as a spirit, we are also like kicked out to like other planets. So those are the two moments that we eventually will move from like here to other, up to a point that, again, going back to our chart there, where our cycle, like up to a point that we are so evolved that we don't need to live in a material world anymore, and we're just helping other spirits to evolve as well.
And who knows, right? Some people here on Earth could be already being kicked out from other places back to this.
Exactly. So yeah, like the whole idea of like the Adamic race. I mean, if you think about it, if we were part of it, it's a shame that we're still here, right? Giving like those thousands of years. So have to always watch out and try to work on our own to be a better spirit.
It's
So
the explanation about the Capella, right?
yeah, the people from Capella. So I'm gonna skip the next slide because we're running out of time here. So all right, so we're wrapping up here, and so okay, like why does all what I said matter to your daily life? So what really matters is we have to maximize our present life on Earth, because we don't want to be here for another thousands of cycles, right? We want to evolve like faster. Because why? Because that leads us to this high level of felicity, or like high level of happiness, and that's what we really want. So what we have to do to maximize our present life on Earth, and it's always thinking that matter is completely impermanent. We're not gonna carry anything with us when we move on in our existence. That the afflictions are a result of attachments to illusions and fantasies created by us. So sometimes we have like high expectation on things, and a lot of those expectations could be material expectations, right? If we have like too many material expectations, the chances that we have like that we fail on that are big. So maybe we should create new goals that not necessarily tied to money or like to career. Try to create goals to become a better person, to become a better parent, to grow kids that will change the world into a better place, rather than just thinking, okay, I have to buy a new car every year, or I have to buy a new house, I have to impress my friends, right? Learn with the difficulties, which is, I think this is a very tough one, to learn when we're going through like this process of like some sort of like difficult. It's in every one of us in a certain moment of our life, we're going through like some sort of like trouble, right? And when we're going through that, I think it's very important to try to detach yourselves from the situation and try to learn why, and think, why am I going through that, right? So I was talking to someone yesterday, and it is this older gentleman, and then he had a stroke, and after the stroke, like if it, like when you look at him, he didn't have any kind of like uh, appearance like disability, but he said he couldn't drink a glass of water for 7 months. Can you guys believe that? Not be able to drink like a glass of water for 7 months. So then we were talking, and I'm like, man, now every time I'm gonna drink water, I'm gonna say thank you. I can drink this glass of water. So so when you see that kind of like pain, like, and he was like very happy about it. He was like, no, but now I can drink my water. The other day I was like really thirsty. I was able to chug like a cup of water. I'm eating everything that I want. So even going through like this pain, he seems like he learned why he had to go through that, and now he appreciates that he can drink like a glass of water.
I always like to think about it. Could be worse. Everything that happens to us, I always think about that. It could be worse, and it could.
It
Right?
could be worse, yeah, and
So let's be thankful it was just this.
yeah, exactly, and also the fact that if you're going through like this some sort of like pain, why? Why are we going through that? Again, yesterday I was helping my neighbor. She was like, she's visually impaired, right? And she asked me, "Oh, can you help me to call a cab to go to the groceries?" And I'm like, "Can you imagine? Like, that's such a simple thing to go to the groceries, and you cannot do it." So when I sometimes I think, oh, I have this problem. When I go through that, and I think I have like zero problems, like my life is really good. So when you see like those, and she's not like complaining about it. She was like, oh yeah, if you help me out, that'll be great. Then I asked her like, so when you get there, like, what do you do? I said, oh no, there's always like somebody to help me. I would ask them like to read the little paper on Target to tell me what is on sale today, and that's what she does. She's very positive about it, which it's something that we always can learn from, right?
She didn't victimize herself.
She
right?
didn't victimize herself. She's going through like this process, but she's not really like
And ask the God, why me? Because we usually have people say that,
Exactly.
why this thing has happened to me? Right?
Yeah.
Instead of saying, oh, that's good. That what I should learn from
What
it.
should I learn from it? Exactly. Like we have to take this opportunity. If we have health, and if we have like strength to work, that's enough, right?
And I know it's very easy to talk when you're not in
We're not in that
the
exactly.
It's very easy
So again,
when you are in the thing.
yeah, and every single one of us go through like some trouble of some sort. So let's try to abstract ourselves from the situation and try to learn, right? And exercise self-knowledge. Try to understand ourselves better, and I think like the very most important one, help others. Without charity, there's no salvation, and not only because of it. Like when we help people, when we put ourselves in their situation, that's how we learn. We learn, and we again, this whole story of my neighbor, like, it makes me think like, oh my God, I'm so grateful that I have my eyes, my vision is perfect. Like, that makes me feel like better about myself, and stop like the whole whining about my life and my little problems, right? So I think that's it, guys. I don't want to run out of time, so hopefully if you guys can take this today, and if you like the book, I would also recommend reading Genesis. It's a great resource, and that's it. So we're gonna go now to the past.